The title of my talk was Embracing Complexity in Business Ecosystems, and it's really at its heart about a shift from traditional tools of market analysis to those that have a much more complex view in order to get a handle on markets that don't yet exist and where those tools of traditional market analysis don't really serve us well. Innovation, as I've come to think about it, is really survival. It's just survival in the face of dramatic change in our lives and in our business environments. And so I think Gary Larson is appropriate here, right? So the tagline is, the real reason the dinosaurs became extinct, right? So in our daily lives and running our businesses, we can make choices that can harm our business, that make us not competitive. But most likely it's something out of the blue, right? It's the asteroid from outer space that completely knocks that business for a loop. It's a fundamental change in the underlying structure of that business or that market that puts us most at risk. Does it pay to be paranoid when innovating? I think the words of our esteemed Andy Grove of "only the paranoid survive," always should be in the back of our mind, because on a daily basis we're worried about our existing competitive environment, right? Producing the next product, expanding our existing markets, and that's great, and we absolutely need to do that and need to pay a lot of attention to that. But again, like the little cartoon I showed from Gary Larson, right? The asteroid could come from completely out of things off your radar, and that can really disrupt your business. So yeah, you need to be paranoid and maybe diligent is another word to use about those type of things. Thinking about that canvas, and I have the factors up there, I think what Starbucks realized is that something had shifted in the social norms based on what they saw traveling abroad and the desire for people to be social. Something else changed. It was an infrastructural change. Anybody kind of think they know what infrastructure changed that helped Starbucks be successful? Ubiquity of the internet, right? You can go to these cafes and there's a new resource for people that changes the economic value within that system. And so what Starbucks did, right, is they've created an they're not competing, they didn't out-compete the existing coffee companies along the known bases of competition, right? They didn't enter that sustaining battle. They shifted the bases of competition entirely, and they did it by focusing on elements that aren't in the traditional business model, the experience that people are having, the underlying social norms that people want, and that people are driving people's choices. I think all times are times to be creating new markets, because, again, I view markets as an emergent system, emergent order, as these underlying factors interact. So economies, social, cultural, technological factors interact to form an organized system that is a market. And those are always changing, whether they're changing dramatically or whether they're in the newspaper and obviously changing, or whether there's just a constant evolution. That fabric that underlies our market is always changing. And so we need to make sure that that doesn't cause our markets to slip away from underneath us. So yeah, there's always an opportunity. The key here is change and time, and how our business models that may serve us well today may not in the future, right? How the landscape upon which we're optimizing our business slips out from under us because something fundamentally is changing. And we think those fall along these about 5 areas, right? The human needs, changes in human needs, their jobs, the choices they make. Can we understand how humans are making choices and making decisions, right? So focus on the customer. We heard that a lot in the talk by Campbell this morning. That's right, but it's not just the customer, it's also what makes a compelling experience for that customer and what drives them to make choices, and how are those experiences changing as resources change. And here there's a little subtlety perhaps, because I'm not talking about just resources in terms of what you might bring, your technology, what you're selling. I'm talking about what constitutes a resource in an economic system. What has value, and how is that shifting over time? Because if the value carrier changes, then the economic system changes. And that's something that our markets are riding on top of. The next one is the ecosystem. We know that there's lots of kind of theories out there that start to talk about how bases of competition shift and companies get disrupted. And I think taking a very broad ecosystem view helps us to put that in a context that is consistent with the rest of these factors in a way that allows us to understand how they're shifting and where they're going. And I'm going to show a real example of this in a minute. And the final one is I alluded to earlier with the guy on the rollerblades and the cell phone, right? Fundamentally, how is technology, and we're a technology company, so we look at technology pretty closely, and how is that changing the social norms, the cultural norms and values of a society in a way that's going to impact a market? And if we can get our hands on these things and kind of put them up there and start to understand what they are and play with them, then I think we can really narrow what can be a huge untenable opportunity space to something that we can take action on. We are in the era of big data, and companies are trying to optimize their business by understanding you as their consumer better, right? And then tailoring an experience and a value to you better. And that's great. They don't have to stop doing that. And maybe we can give them just what they need as opposed to everything they collect and do a better job for them. But that doesn't preclude also allowing individuals to participate in new ways that create value for them. And value may not be strictly economic or term monetary value. It could be in value of participating in a cause that they care about, or contributing their data to a collective or an alliance that provides them kind of a summary or an aggregate data set that brings value to them. So I think there's lots of value creation that is yet to be explored. And we don't have to turn over the existing businesses, we just have to augment and complement them in ways that add value. One of the techniques we use is a challenge or a hackathon. Anybody participated or hosted hackathons and challenges before? And we do this because we realize that all the ideas aren't going to reside within Intel. We want to mobilize and harness the value of entrepreneurs everywhere in order to help understand what value can be created and what business models are viable in this new ecosystem. So this is one of it we ran. There's my colleague John, who's presenting a challenge that we presented at a conference called The Feast in New York City, which was in conjunction with the Open Data Initiative. So the city is opening up all its data sets and trying to create value out of that for individuals. And this is something else that Peter mentioned at the very beginning of the conference yesterday, and that's that design thinking. And certainly design thinking is important when we're designing products for people and understanding how they use them and how it alleviates their needs or efficiencies, and there's been lots of terms used. Where we find design to be very valuable is in designing those economies and these challenges in ways that articulate how our hypothesis might work, how personal data can solve a real problem for a real person in a real context. And so in this challenge we had two. We had single moms trying to navigate New York City and get education and childcare and all those things lined up for their child, and elderly who were in their homes and having trouble getting access to food, and there's food banks and carts are supposed to roll but it's not economically viable. How do we use personal data to reset that economic system in a way that solves the problem for a real person through this data? And how does that data create value, and what is the sustainable business model behind it? The old tools that have served us for generations and years are very good, right? Porter's forces and ecosystem maps that are kind of centric to your market are very good in sustaining innovation, understanding your existing market and how to grow it and who's important within that ecosystem. Where I think we do need new tools and new science really is understanding the complex nature of a very dynamic ecosystem where technology is creating very rapid change in business models and what constitutes a resource and what constitutes value in ways that those tools don't do as good a job as. Not that they're not important for our existing businesses, but we need more. And so part of our work is to think about what are the elements that underlie those markets that precede those opportunities before there's a market to analyze, and what do we do? What tools can you apply? What insights, what thinking to bring to bear to allow you to take action before it's too late?